All right. Well, welcome to Workflows with Copy AI Office Hours. Today we are talking about how you can take your prompting and chat and take it to the next level, moving it from just prompting one-off content to full-on production. To do that, and really be able to scale your workflows, usually requires a couple of things that are standard pieces of information that we're going to go through how to set those up today. So, with that, just some quick introductions. I'm Chandra Toy. I'm your Senior AI Solutions Consultant, and with me is Meg Turner. I'll let her introduce herself.
Awesome. Thanks, Chandra. Meg Turner here, Customer Success Manager for the Copy AI and Fullcast team. So I will be here to field any questions you guys have. And then, as always, if anyone has questions after the call, please feel free to reach out to me or your dedicated Customer Success Manager. And we're happy to set time or discuss any of this in more depth with you.
Fantastic. So today we're going to be covering some of those tips and tricks that really can take your workflows to the next level. We're going to be covering off how to standardize things across teams with things like a brand voice or config files. There are additional ways to do this in copy, not just these two. So something to just kind of keep in mind. Next office hours, we're going to be talking about tables, which is probably one of the most powerful ways to standardize things across your entire organization. But today I'm just going to cover off some baby steps. So if that's where you're at, you can start there and we can build on to that later on with tables. I'd also like to talk about how we can look at automating things. So once you've built a couple of different workflows, you start to realize that there's sort of a cascade that happens. Like, you have a webinar and there's a transcript like we'll have today, and you can create a blog. And then from there, you might also do some social. So if we understand that there's a cascade, we can start tying some of those workflows together, make things a lot easier. They just sort of happen. Um, all right, and then we're going to wrap it up with one other really important workflow tool to kind of taking this to a production level, and that's looking at integrations. There's a couple of thoughts that I have about integrations that we'll talk about too, not just what types there are, but how to kind of think a little bit more broadly when it comes to AI and building out process. So that's what we've got for covering things off today. Like I said, there is another office hours coming up in the next month on tables, which is a really powerful tool that paired with workflows works really great together. But anytime you got a question, feel free to interrupt and ask, and or put it in the chat, and Meg will take a look at that too. So I'm going to start with just the basics, right? If you've never ever played with workflows, you're just going to want to go to Copy AI, log in, and then once you're logged in, um, then I want to make sure you're on the right team space, workspace, and because you can have multiple workspaces, you can have a personal one and a work one. So make sure you're on the right workspace, and then also make sure you're on the correct team space. If you're doing things in general, which is the default, everyone in your org can see it. So just a happy reminder. And if you're doing it in personal, you're not really able to share it with other people. That's why additional team spaces are nice to have. Now, once you're in the correct place, the next thing that you're going to want to do is create new. That's in the top right corner. You'll see a button that says create new. And we're going to go ahead and create a brand new workflow. Now, I'm not going to walk you through everything there is to do with workflows, but I am going to walk you through a few key components. So here I am in my workspace, in a team space that I'm happy with. So I'm going to go ahead and create new and create a brand new workflow. Now, workflows themselves, you'll notice they start with sort of a blank screen, and you get to decide what you're going to build. Now, if you're not quite sure where to start, we have a little chat window down here on the bottom that can help build a workflow. So maybe I need to create a LinkedIn post from a blog, or maybe to promote a blog would be a better way to put it. So we could just go ahead and type that in and let the workflow builder build it for us. Now, is it always perfect? No. And sometimes it needs a little bit of tweaking, but if you're not sure where to start, this is a great way to start. just to get going. And that'll go ahead and build out the initial steps that you might need for any given workflow. So that's our first tip. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you are already familiar with building workflows, so we may not just hang out for this thing to finish building. We may just dive right into some of our tips and tricks. Oh, there it goes, right? So we've got an input file, and this is the initial thing that triggers off the workflow. This is a manual input. Now, one thing to just note is they don't, just because it's a manual input doesn't mean that's the only way you can trigger a workflow. There's a couple of different ways that you can trigger workflows, so we'll dive into that in just a second. But what it's going to do is it's going to scrape a blog post, and you'll see that the input file is a URL for a blog. So it's going to scrape that blog post, and then it's going to extract some key information, and then it's going to generate a LinkedIn post on the back end. Now, there's a couple of different ways I've mentioned. There's more than one way to do these things. Yours may not look like this. There's also another scenario where maybe you feeded a few different examples of what your good LinkedIn posts look like. So if you're going back and you're looking at your past content and what generated a lot of engagement, that's a great place to start. And you can actually give it a couple of examples of here's three examples of really great LinkedIn posts. Can you create ones that are just like these? So it can structure them the same way, it can answer the same sorts of questions, and basically build out this structure from which you feed it. So just in terms of getting started with workflows, this is a great place to start, just using the chat. Um, and it'll at least get you part of the way there. Now, whenever you're done with a workflow, um, configuring it, and what I mean by configuring is if you're clicking through all of these actions and making sure that the default prompts and the default settings that it's using are adequate. You can, by the way, also change models if you want to too. And you're happy with it, the next thing to do is publish it and give it a test. So to test a workflow, there's a couple of ways you can do this. One is you can actually just click this test button and you can feed it some information. So again, we're looking at a blog post URL here. And when you run that workflow, it'll run in real time. It doesn't cost any credits to test it, but it also doesn't hold on to that information. So the information that it's generating is quite transient. So that's, I'm often collaborating with customers, so I don't really like using the test workflow for that reason. There is one other thing though that is kind of nice about the test workflow is that if an individual step needs to be tweaked, you can tweak that step and just rerun that step and see the results differently. So that's a nice feature with this test workflow that is a little bit different than running it live. Now, to run it live, though, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can come up to the top and you can hit Run Workflow, and you can start it here, and that will go ahead and run the results, and you can see them down at the bottom. Quite often, they take a few minutes to run, and so you might navigate away from this. All of your results, though, are stored up here in this table. Now, we have two different types of tables at Copy. There's what I like to call the run table, which is a table that shows you all of the runs that have been done on this particular workflow. Not to be confused with a what I call a data table, and that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Those are over here on the left column. So when I talk about the table, we're talking about the actual table of everything that ran through this workflow. It's kind of like a log. And you can also run multiple rows of a workflow at the same time by just adding new rows, plugging in those blog post URLs, and then kicking them all off. And they can be running concurrently too. So that's another way you can run workflows. Another way that you can run workflows is like maybe you're comfortable building a workflow, but maybe you've got a coworker who needs to use it and they might not be comfortable in the interface or have a license to it. So you can also run by form. Now, what happens in the form is you can configure some nice, beautiful things on the back end here where you can say, show the workflow output or send a thank you page. You can change the color of the buttons to be more branded. And you can also decide what outputs you're going to surface, right? And what things you're going to have available to the end user. But after you're done and you've configured all that, you click save on some of those buttons. There's a page link here we can copy. And when I paste it in, now I don't need a login or a license and copy. I have access to this workflow and I can put in this blog post and it'll convert that to a LinkedIn post. So there's another great way to interact with copy in terms of running the workflows. Now, one last thing that's a bit more advanced, but this is a really nice thing to have. You can also run it from other systems. So you can set up an API key in the configuration section. So let me just briefly jump over to that and show you where you would view your API keys. You could create a brand new API key that can be plugged in on a third-party system. And then coming back to our workflow that we run. There we are. Um, you can also then give it the endpoint. So it not only knows how to communicate with copy with the API key, but it also knows which endpoint, which workflow we're actually going to run. And you can start triggering workflows from third-party systems. So we'll come back to that when we talk about integrations a little bit later. But that's some quick overview of how workflows play. So again, today I had said we were going to cover off a couple of things. So I want to talk about standardizing things because when you're looking at taking these workflows from prompting to more of a production environment, you want to standardize some things like brand voice and potentially some configuration files. So let me show you how to do both of those. Now, brand voice is handled in the configurations panel. So I'm going to come down here to configurations and you see brand voice. And brand voice is, if you've never run it before, which will show up in any team space you haven't set it up in, you'll get a little short 1-minute video that talks about how to do this. So if you forget, you've got a prompt right there in front of you that'll help you remember how to do this. I've done this a few times, so I'm just going to hit create brand voice. Now, one of the things that's nice about this is you can feed it a URL. So if you're not sure where to start, like what is our brand voice? You can take a look at your website and what you've already written for your website and use that to be analyzed. Oops, helps if I spell it correctly. So fullcast.com. And I'm going to go ahead and analyze brand voice. Now you can also do this on an individual level. So maybe that's how you talk about things for your company, but maybe when it comes to maybe creating a LinkedIn post for a specific executive, you could send a couple of LinkedIn posts. You could send in anything that's written. You can also paste in here. So it doesn't have to be a URL. It could be a number of things, but you'll want to take a look at what it comes back with because it's analyzed that brand voice and what it found on the website in this case, and we want to make sure that it's accurate. You can rename this brand voice, so I'll call this Fullcast website. And then once you've got that set up, you can choose a couple of other settings, whether you want it to default across your entire team space or share it across your entire workspace. Um, and you may want to go ahead and turn both of those on and then save the brand voice. Now, brand voice is created. How do we actually use it? We can use it in workflows, but you can also use it in chat too. So if we come back up to our home screen, we can go into chat and create a brand new chat. And you'll notice at the very bottom, the default now is defaulting to the Fullcast website. Looks like we had one already set up that was shared across. So Fullcast website can be the brand voice we want to use now. And as I mentioned, you can have multiples. So if you have a specific executive you're writing a LinkedIn post for, you can create a brand voice for them too. Now, how do we use that in a workflow? Workflow is a little bit different. So if I wanted to create or add the brand voice, I've got a workflow here. Um, I could create a whole new action. And if I just type in brand voice, I can rewrite it, whatever the output is, with a specific brand voice. So I'm going to back reference by clicking the typing hash to the output that this workflow is creating. And I'm going to select the brand voice I want to rewrite with and save that action. And that'll go ahead and take one more pass at that output content and rewrite it with the brand voice. Now, that's one way to do it. Other ways that you can do it is if you're feeding content examples that already have that embedded, it's automatically going to pick some of that up. So you shouldn't necessarily need to do a lot of rewriting in that case. Another way to handle it is through what's called a config file. So I'm going to go ahead and revert these changes. I'm going to use this workflow a few times. A config gives you a little bit more than just brand voice. Because often I find customers will have not just a brand voice, but they'll have a style guide or a grammar guide, that sort of thing. So here what we can do is a config file. So a config file is basically just another workflow, but you'll notice that everything in this workflow is set up as format output, which is plain text. So here what you can do is you can say, you can rename any of these format outputs. So I can add another one down at the bottom. That's another format output. And then once I've got that in there, I can rename that to whatever I want it to be. So maybe I have not just a social guide or an email example. Maybe I've got um, a grammar guide, something like that. And that'll rename that as a grammar guide. And what I actually do then is I just paste my grammar guide right into this field here. And I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong. Grammar. Is it A or E or Meg? I don't remember. Anyway, I'll match what I did before. It looks like it's wrong. Um, okay. Um, so gosh, being a little bit attentive, we're gonna fix that too. All right, so and then I can publish this workflow. And you'll notice it's really all it's doing is holding information. And that's exactly what these config files do. There's one trick to using a config file. Config has to be in the name of the workflow. Now, how do we use it once we've set that all up? Because I've now loaded it with social instructions and blogs structured and output email outbound email examples and event emails and grammar guides, and you can keep going and going if you want to on this. Once you've set that up, then how do we actually use it? Well, any workflow, and I do mean any workflow, can use it by just loading the config file. So on any one of these workflows, so like this is an example where I've loaded the config for a social. But let me just go ahead and show you what that might look like if I were to convert it from scratch or load it from scratch. So basically, in any workflow, you can put it in anywhere you want. You just want to have it before you're going to use it. So I'm going to just type load config. And then it's going to ask me which config do you want because you might have more than one. So in our case, we just have the one. I'm going to select the style guide. And you'll notice here again, this turns red. It's guiding you. What you have to choose the output you want to use. And remember, we set up, there was already social blog, outbound emails, event emails. We set up this additional grammar guide. So you could select all of them and just load it once and use it throughout the entire workflow. You could load different elements of it at different points. Just depends on how much data you've got in there. Because you really just want to pull what you're referring to if you can. So there you go, load config, and that's going to load just the grammar guide section. And then from there, I can go ahead and rename this. We'll just call this grammar guide. I'll spell it correctly this time. And then I can go on and I can generate text with it. I can, use it to edit documents and just do a quick pass, like an editorial review of output. I can check it with brand voice. You can load pretty much anything you want into these config files. So think of them as a way to kind of store things in memory that you can call back whenever you want. So that's the other big trick when it comes to standardizing. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, there is one more really great way to do that, and that is with tables. We're going to cover that next week because tables get a little bit more complex, but they are incredibly powerful at being able to store information. All right, so we'll publish that workflow. That's ready to be built onto later. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about in terms of like really getting the most out of your workflows is automating orchestration. Usually what'll happen is I'll have customers that are like they've got a whole campaign where they've got to generate blogs and there's webinar event promotions and then just a whole boatload of content that goes around a particular campaign or even outbounding, right? You can have a whole bunch of different emails that you want to generate. And what you start to realize is these workflows, they sort of cascade. So if I come back up and I take a look at, I've got a couple of workflows here where I've got a blog that I'm going to create, but then I'm also going to create a LinkedIn post from that blog to help promote the blog and bring people to it. So I may go ahead and I may have tested these and I like the output from each one, but I'm really tired of like copying the output and pasting it into the new workflow. So if you're happy with the way that those are coming out, the next step is to tie them all together. So the way that we would do that is we go into the top workflow, the very first thing that would happen, and we can run the other workflows in line. So to do that, we're just going to click the add button again. And most of those are held right under orchestration. Another way to do it is just you can type run and it'll bring up just these run workflows. This is my favorite one, and I'll tell you why. It's because this one, uh, it runs it in line, which means even it's going to pull that workflow in and then bring the outputs back to me. This one works as well, but what it's doing is it's passing it off to the other workflow. So it sort of runs separately, and you have to go into each of the output tables to grab the resulting content. So run workflows in line is nice because it will return the content to the same workflow. So you're really only having to be in that one window. So in our case, I've got a blog and I want to be able to take that blog and convert it to a LinkedIn post to help promote it. So I need to give it a couple of bits of information, like what is the blog post that I'm starting with? Well, remember this is the workflow for creating blogs. So I'm going to pass it the output, which is the blog itself, over into that LinkedIn post converter. And then what I'm going to tell it I want back is the generated LinkedIn post, right? So uh, easy peasy. And just like that, now we've tied these workflows together, and it will not only, when I run this blog one, it's not only going to create the blog as an output, but it's also then going to run that workflow in line. And again, I like to rename these um, just so I know what they are at a glance. So another quick tip on staying organized with your workflows. And that's going to run the LinkedIn post for it too. And so now when I'm looking at my run table, I've got the output from my original one, which is the blog, and then I've also got my LinkedIn post, boom, boom, right next to each other. And they run automatically together. So that is really huge time savings piece as well, right there. All right. Another thing that we can do is we can start looking at orchestrating not just the workflows themselves, but orchestrating on a broader scale from outside of copy. And that's where the integrations come into play, and we can really start to see some acceleration. Now, I just want to pause for a second to say it's always a good idea to have the human in the loop, and that's really what we encourage. So you also have to think about this level of discernment of what should I be handling and what should AI be doing, because certainly there should be some eyes on these and the integrations, even though they're fantastic and you can automate end to end, doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good idea. Okay, we want to always check our work because ultimately we're the ones responsible for the output it's generating. One quick side comment on that too. Uh, is it, if we think about these workflows working with AI in general, as having a brand new intern that comes into your environment, it's a really good mindset because if you had a brand new intern, you'd have to make sure that they understood where everything was. Where are you getting information for the input to a blog? Where are you getting the style guides? So AI as well also needs to know all of that stuff. But you wouldn't just give that to an intern and then walk away. You would be coaching that intern on, yeah, this looks great, or this is fantastic, but could you fix a few more things here? You'd give them feedback so that they could improve and become more autonomous over time. Same thing when you're building a workflow. We never expect it to be perfect right out of the gate. We have to show it where all the resources are at. And then we have to make sure that we're staying engaged and paying attention to the outputs that it's giving us. And if you're seeing trends in that output, then you want to be able to add prompting to refine it, get it a little tighter. Will it ever be 100%? We shall see. But for now, it's always a good idea to have human in the loop and make sure that you're watching things as they move out the door because we're the people responsible for the results. Okay. So off my soapbox, back to what we were talking about, which is integrations. All of your integrations are going to be here in the far left panel under configurations. Now, I have a couple of integrations set up here already. You can integrate with Slack, with Salesforce, with Google Docs, and you can add a number of other workflow connections to the mix. So if you've got Teams, HubSpot, Outreach, OneDrive, any of those you're able to connect with, and we can do many, many more. So there's also the ability to connect your workflows through things like Zapier. So how do you use those in a workflow? If I come back to my workflow home, um, let me, where do we want to put this? Let me just go ahead and create a brand new workflow for this one. And I'll show you a couple of things. So if I click on add a trigger, you'll notice here, we've got a whole bunch of Salesforce and HubSpot. Gong calls are another one. So think about that. Table rows, if those are changed too, that can also um, work. So keep that in mind for next month when we talk about tables. You can watch a table for a table row change. Just like you can also watch your CRM for like maybe there's a new contact that's created. And maybe you want to do some enrichment on a contact that's created. So you'd basically come in, you'd connect your CRM, and then choose the Salesforce fields that you want to pull in and then define your trigger conditions, right? So maybe it's a new contact that's created with a specific field filled in. Maybe you need their LinkedIn profile. And you can run some LinkedIn kind of uh, contact intelligence before you try to outbound to them. So that's one thing that you could do. You could also, and just kind of ideating here about different ways that you could do some integrations. You can also use some of your outputs to send like a Slack message. So say, for example, here's one that maybe might want to look at is if this new contact is created, you could send it to a Slack channel about that's linked to that customer site. So maybe there's a new person that's been created, and so you're giving some information, doing some account intelligence and updating the Slack channel for that account on that new contact that's been brought into the mix. So that's one scenario. But the sky's the limit. You think about all these different endpoints, and this is where I really want to encourage you to kind of think bigger. When we talk about AI, because so much of this sort of breaks down process, right? If we think about how process started, right? It's that assembly line mentality. And what made that task, that individual task on an assembly line, one person's task is that's how much one person can handle, right? So that's how our process is just formed by nature. You stay in your own domain, your own environment. But AI kind of forces this conversation to be a little bit bigger and to look at process end to end, to look at our throughput of an entire system, to find our bottlenecks, and to then be able to use the tools to open those bottlenecks up. The funny thing about that is the second you open one bottleneck, there's another one somewhere else. But it's a way of like optimizing your process. And so when you think about that, think about how, for example, going back to our intern scenario, how does an intern get notified about an incoming request for a new blog or a new LinkedIn post? Um, if that's coming from another system or from another person, is there a way to make that a little bit more automated? So these integrations, I highly encourage you to take a look at them. There's a lot of different options in here in terms of integrations, and they can be really powerful. And we can also work with third party like Zapier too. So when you're looking at all of the integrations that can be set up to trigger these workflows to interact through API keys and things of that nature, the sky's the limit. It's a very, very powerful system to help you automate a lot of your content. So, um, I think that's pretty much it in terms of the content that I wanted to cover today. Meg, do you have anything that you see come up with customers that you want to add in there?
Yeah, I mean, probably nothing new to add, but I really love that you touched on a few points in terms of when you're very first working with workflows, going through and looking at all those different tabs. I think some customers get a little bit confused, especially if they're just using a workflow for the first time and not even building one of where do where do I go to put those inputs? Like, how do I even launch this workflow to begin with? And then moving down, if you do become a builder, I think really understanding that point that Chandra mentioned of this is going to be automated, but to make it automated and the best of its ability, you do need to give it those inputs initially. Make sure it's set up really well to start so that long term it's less work, maybe a little bit more work up front, but in the end, it'll give you much better quality. So loved everything you touched on, Chandra.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and next month especially, I want to just this is where the this just gets super juicy when we start talking about tables because that config file that we're able to load up with all of that information, tables take it to a whole new level. You can have things like a personas database where you're talking about different personas. You can split that up by different regions. You can also split that up by different brand categories or, product categories. So that's one way you can use tables. Other ways you can use tables is maybe I've got a whole boatload of customer stories that I really want to be able to use in my content. So maybe we can find the best, customer story relative to that persona that we're trying to outbound to. Again, you can have your style guides, your writing guides. Those can also land in tables. So like I said, there's more than one way to do things. So brand voice and using info base, that's one way. Config files are a little bit more flexible. Tables are infinitely more flexible too. So I highly encourage you, if you have some time next month to join us on the tables conversation, please do so. The details on that will be coming out in the next month. So you should receive an email from your CSM. And we hope to see you there. So thank you for the time today. Short and sweet, but any questions before we sign off?
Looks like you covered it pretty well.
All right. Well,
Um,
sounds good. We look forward to hearing from you guys if you have questions, and hopefully that helps you get the most out of your workflows. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.